Right. Welcome to session six, everybody. God's good law, but we're going to retitle this Covenant, Constitution, and Kingdom, and breaking this down into three columns. On the top of these columns, I should say, maybe in the middle of the screen, we're looking at the stories of Adam and Eve here, and then underneath that, the story of Israel juxtaposed against that. But the idea is to show the commonality between the two, because essentially what we're seeing is a rehashing of this yet again. All right. So considering the idea of covenant, God made a clear covenant with Adam and Eve. And we know this, you'll have to go back to the story that links together Noah and what happens there, and how God recycles the very same terms of this covenant with Adam and Eve, with Noah now, when he tells him to be fruitful, multiply, and he has placed everything under his authority. The fear of Noah will be upon all things, because essentially he is now the potentate that rules over it all, though he doesn't wear a crown and doesn't live in a palace any more than Adam did. But the same concept is that in Genesis chapter 6, when God says, I'll establish my covenant with you, this was not simply alluding to, I'm going to put my rainbow in the sky so that you and all creation will know I'll never flood the earth again. That's a promise, it's part of it. But of course, the idea, the mandate of being fruitful, multiply, ruling over all things is really what he's striving toward here. So that covenant, of course, is moved forward into Israel when we look down here at the bottom of the screen, that if you will simply listen to me and keep my covenant. So this covenant is building upon the very construct of the covenant that's given to Adam and Eve, because the bigger idea behind that covenant is not simply to just make babies and then rule over everything, but of course to serve as God's priest to everything. And in doing so, they are going to bring the blessing of Eden into the furthest point on the map as they expand the boundaries of the garden and so forth, right? Hence the reason why God told them to work and watch over the garden as he endues them with the wisdom of how they're to conduct this mission. And then that's exactly what God is preparing Israel for. Keeping the covenant is not simply just focusing internally on their own individual relationship with Yahweh, because he tells them they are to be his kingdom of priests and his holy nation. The idea is them in comparison to all the other nations, they are Yahweh's possession, and Yahweh is going to buy back the rest of the nations in working through Israel as his kingdom of priests representing him unto all these nations. There's a clear mandate in that when you connect these two concepts together, right? So we see the covenant being passed down. Here's the constitution behind how this kingdom is supposed to work. God had, in the original story, started off simple and small. You can eat from every tree in the garden except for the one of the knowledge of good and evil. And if you do, you will die. These are your rights, essentially, of what you can do while you're here in the garden. This is how they're to conduct themselves with Yahweh until he gives them more wisdom. But that sadly, that doesn't happen before they are expelled out of the garden. Essentially, the Decalogue becomes that. This is how, in these first four commands, they are to live rightly with God. In this second six commands, this is how they are to live rightly with each other and conduct themselves righteously within this kingdom. And that's exactly what this idea is, that God has carved out a kingdom for Adam and Eve to rule over. There is no mistaking the idea here that God has made Adam and Eve king and queen over all of creation as you get to the end of Genesis chapter 1. To simply surmise that Adam is anything less than is to totally miss the implication and the impact of these words. The impetus alone is to drive us to the idea that Adam is king, and this continues to get pushed down through each of the stories after it, right? So God had looked at the man, said it's not good for man to be alone, and he's caused the man to realize this too, as he's named everything and realized there's no helper for him. So God is going to make one, right? So he causes the deep sleep to come over Adam, takes a rib, he makes the woman, brings the woman to him. Now the king has his queen who is going to help him in all of this. And then God performs the first marriage ceremony. Man has said, this is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. And God says, and from this moment on, a man shall leave his mother and father, cleave unto his wife, and they two shall become one flesh, right? So essentially, God has spoken through Moses to the people, and the people respond in Exodus 24, everything that you have said, we will do. So, of course, this is Exodus 20 that we are focusing on for this key text. But I would encourage you as a teacher, because we're in our next lesson, we're going to go beyond Exodus 24. It's important for us to also look at the context of Exodus chapters 21, 2, and 3, and all of those particular laws. I'm not saying you have to go through them. You can provide a simple summary of verses uh, 1 through 5 of the next chapter all deal with this particular parameters. And so this is how it all feeds into the concept of living rightly with God and rightly with man. And this is how this is to be conducted from this moment moving forward. In that context, God is also telling them, if you are to build an altar for me, you're to make it of unhewn stone, right? Well, that's a little odd considering that very shortly after this, within a year, they're going to have a bronze altar. And they're not to be constructing their own altars to offer burnt offerings on. They have to bring it to the gate of the tabernacle and do that even when the tabernacle is gone and the temple takes its place. The idea is you do not offer burnt offerings on your own, even if they are to Yahweh. But why does God give sanction for them to build an altar of unhewn stone? Seemingly, it's because even now you can start offering your votive offerings until that altar is constructed. So it's meant to be implemented immediately, but then parts of it seemingly will be adjusted as things change within the nation itself. So the people say, everything you said we will do. And then Moses goes up the mountain to tell or to tell God that everybody's on board with this. Essentially, it's God's marriage proposal in the form of giving the law, and they're saying, we want to do it. We're in. We're going to be exclusively yours. Hopefully, at this point, they've learned their lessons of how they've already kind of flubbed things up a little bit out in the wilderness, questioning and testing God. Seemingly now they want to give him their whole heart, their full selves. And then we see how this is ratified. Then he sent out young Israelite men. They offer burnt offerings and sacrifices, fellowship offerings to the Lord. They took the blood, set it in basins. Other half of the blood was spattered on the altar. He took the covenant scroll and read it aloud to the people. They responded, we will do it and obey all that the Lord has commanded. So Moses took the blood, splattered it on the people, and said, this is the blood of the covenant, which God has made concerning all these words. So, much in the same way that a man has taken a virginal bride to be his own, and then there is a tradition supposedly behind that there are supposed to be sheets that the marriage is consummated on, and then those sheets are kept by the father of the bride, just in case the husband ever wanted to accuse her of not being virginal on the eve of their marriage and the consummation act is conducted. These can be brought out as legal evidence. Yes, indeed, she was virginal, and this is the act or the proof that the marriage was consummated with her being so. There might be some connections here with the idea that blood is sealing the deal here in making virginal Israel Yahweh's exclusive bride and essentially property, right? With respect to them being ransomed, they are his as he's bought them out of Egypt. And these are the very words that the prophets of later times are going to use as they describe how God started his relationship with virginal Israel before they adulterated themselves, right? In going after foreign gods. So down here in the bottom of the screen with these black blocks, here we have in Genesis 2, both the man and his wife were naked, feeling no shame. They hear the voice of the Lord walking in the time of the evening breeze in the garden. And they had been apparently walking with God repetitiously enough to know that that was going to happen. So in their state, where they have now come together as man and wife, they walk with God in unification with him as more or less part of a triangle with God at the center of their relationship until he's not. And the same thing seems to be happening here with respect to Exodus 24, because Moses, along with Nadab, Aaron, and his two sons, Nadab, Abihu, and the 70 of elders chosen Israel's chosen elders, go up onto the mountain, and they saw the God of Israel. As Adam and Eve were on a mountain walking with God, so here this group of men are now pulled up into the mountain, and they are walking with God. They saw something like a pavement made of lapis lazuli that was as clear as the sky itself, and God did not harm the Israelite nobles. They saw him, and they ate and they drank with him. So the idea is that God has carved out his covenant here with them. And in no uncertain terms, he means to do through them and with them exactly what he intended to do with Adam and Eve. Now, the question is whether or not that will happen. And we know, of course, if we're familiar with the story, sadly, it doesn't. But what also is appreciable here is that at least God was willing to start that with them. And even though they won't relent and give in and work with God, in the meantime, God is eventually going to strive toward that end through his perfect Son, who he will call up unto himself multiple times on mountaintops for the sake of showing himself to him. And then Jesus, of course, drawing his own disciples deeper into relationship with him. So I hope that's helpful. And thank you for your time. I'll see you in the next lesson.